Everyone laughed when the struggling single mother spent her last $500 on an abandoned airport. They called her desperate, foolish, out of her mind. But when she climbed the rusted stairs of the control tower and opened the hidden vault, what she discovered inside changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning Sarah Mitchell received the eviction notice, the sky over Phoenix hung low and gray, pressing down on the cracked pavement of the trailer park like a heavy hand. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. She held the paper with trembling fingers, reading the words that had become painfully familiar over the past year. 30 days to vacate. Final warning. No exceptions. Behind her, through the thin aluminum walls of the trailer, she could hear her daughter Emma coughing. The same wet, persistent cough that had kept them both awake for weeks. The medical bills sat in a stack on the kitchen table, each one stamped with red letters demanding payment. Between the hospital visits, the medications, and the rent she could barely afford, Sarah's bank account had dwindled to almost nothing. She was 32 years old, a high school teacher on unpaid leave, raising a 7-year-old daughter alone after her husband had walked out 2 years earlier. The child support checks had stopped coming 6 months ago, and her calls to his number went straight to voicemail. She had applied for every assistance program, every grant, every loan she could find, all denied. The trailer park manager, a heavy-set man named Frank, had stopped being sympathetic 3 months ago. Now his notes were terse, his eyes cold when she passed him in the office. She knew he had a waiting list of people ready to take her spot the moment she was gone. The thought of being homeless, of Emma sleeping in the car, of losing what little stability they had left, made Sarah's chest tighten until she could barely breathe. That afternoon, after dropping Emma at her friend's house for a playdate, Sarah drove to the public library. It had become her refuge, the one place with free internet where she could search for solutions without judgment. She sat at a computer terminal in the back corner, her hands shaking as she typed into the search bar. Cheap land, Arizona. Foreclosure auctions. Anything under $1,000. The results were mostly scams, overpriced lots in the middle of nowhere, or properties with liens and back taxes that would cost more than she could ever pay. She scrolled for hours, her eyes burning, her hope dimming with each click. Then, buried on the third page of search results, she found it. County auction. Read the headline. Abandoned property. Roosevelt Field Municipal Airport. Minimum bid. $500. No reserve. Sold. As is. Her heart skipped. $500. She had exactly $523 in her checking account, her last buffer before complete destitution. The listing included a single photograph, grainy and washed out, showing an expanse of cracked concrete, overgrown weeds, and in the distance, the silhouette of a control tower rising against the sky like a broken tooth. The description was brief: property abandoned since 1987, structures condemned, no utilities, no road access, buyer responsible for all cleanup and demolition. The county disclaims all liability. Sarah stared at the image, her mind racing. An airport, abandoned for decades, condemned. It sounded insane. It probably was insane. But it was also land, 50 acres, according to the listing. And land, even worthless land, was something she didn't have. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of Emma's cough. She thought of the car that needed new tires, the bills that kept coming, the endless, grinding weight of poverty that pressed down on her every single day. What did she have to lose? That evening, she told her sister Rachel about the auction. They sat in Rachel's kitchen, a warm, comfortable space that made Sarah ache with envy. Rachel listened with her arms crossed, her expression growing more skeptical with every word. "An abandoned airport," Rachel said slowly. "For $500. Sarah, do you hear yourself? That's a scam. Or it's condemned for a reason. Probably contaminated with toxic waste or something." "It's a county auction," Sarah replied, her voice tight. "It's legitimate. I checked." "Legitimate doesn't mean it's worth anything," Rachel shot back. "You're talking about spending your last money on a piece of junk in the desert. How are you going to get there? How are you going to do anything with it? You can't even afford to fix your car." "I can't afford to be homeless either," Sarah said quietly. "If I have land, even terrible land, I have options. Maybe I can put a trailer on it. Maybe I can apply for different kinds of loans. I don't know, Rachel. But right now I have nothing." Her sister's face softened, but the doubt remained. "What about Emma? Have you thought about what this means for her?" "I think about Emma every second of every day," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "I'm doing this for her." Rachel sighed, rubbing her temples. "I just don't want to see you throw away what little you have left on something that's going to make things worse." But Sarah had already made up her decision. The auction was in 2 days, held online. She would bid, she would win, and somehow she would find a way forward. The morning of the auction, Sarah sat at the library computer, with her heart pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. The bidding opened at 10 a.m. She watched the screen, her palms slick with sweat, as the countdown timer ticked down to 0. When the listing went live, there was silence. No other bidders appeared. The minimum bid of $500 sat alone on the screen, blinking like a question mark. Sarah hesitated, her finger hovering over the mouse. This was it. Her last chance to back out, to keep the money, to find some other way. She clicked the bid button. The screen refreshed. "Your bid of $500 has been accepted. You are the current high bidder." She waited, barely breathing, watching for someone else to outbid her. 1 minute passed. 2, 5. The timer counted down the final seconds. 10, 9, 8. No one else bid. When the auction closed, the screen flashed a message. "Congratulations. You are the winning bidder. Payment due within 24 hours." Sarah sat back in her chair, her hands shaking. She had just bought an abandoned airport for $500. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The next day, after transferring the payment and signing a stack of digital forms, she received the deed by email. Roosevelt Field Municipal Airport. It read, 48.7 acres. All structures included. Owner assumes all responsibility. She printed the document and held it in her hands, staring at the official seal, the legal language, the coordinates that marked a place she had never seen. It felt surreal, impossible, like holding a lottery ticket that might be worthless, or might be salvation. Her sister called that evening. "Did you really do it?" Rachel asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and concern. "I did," Sarah said. There was a long silence. Then Rachel sighed. "Well, I guess you own an airport now. God help you." That night, Sarah lay awake in the trailer, listening to Emma's breathing in the next room, and stared at the ceiling. She had no idea what she had just done. No idea what she would find when she finally drove out to see the property. No idea if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. But as she clutched the deed to her chest, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. A spark, a flicker of possibility. Maybe it was foolish, maybe it was desperate, but it was hers. And for the first time in years, that meant something. The following Saturday, Sarah borrowed Rachel's truck, strapped Emma into the passenger seat, and drove east into the desert. The directions from the county assessor's office led them down a series of increasingly rough roads, the pavement giving way to gravel, then to dirt. The landscape stretched flat and endless. If you find this story engaging, Please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional rusted fence post. Emma pressed her face against the window, her eyes wide. "Where are we going, Mom?" "To see our new place," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What kind of place?" "An airport." Emma turned to look at her, confused. "Like where planes go?" "Used to go," Sarah corrected. "A long time ago." They drove for another 20 minutes, the road growing rougher with each mile. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her stomach churning with a mixture of anticipation and dread. What if there was nothing there? What if it was worse than she imagined? What if she had thrown away their last hope on a dream that didn't exist? Then, cresting a low rise, she saw it. The airport spread before them like the skeleton of a forgotten world. A long runway stretched across the desert, its concrete surface fractured and buckled, weeds thrusting through the cracks like grasping fingers. Rusted, chain-link fences sagged in the wind. An old hangar, its roof partially collapsed, leaned to one side like a drunk man. And in the center of it all, rising from the flat expanse like a monument to abandonment, stood the control tower. Sarah stopped the truck and sat in silence, staring. The tower was 3 stories tall, its windows shattered or boarded over, its metal frame streaked with rust. A faded sign near the base read Roosevelt Field Municipal Airport, established 1952. "It's creepy," Emma whispered. Sarah couldn't disagree. The place looked like something from a post-apocalyptic movie, a relic of a time that had been forgotten and left to decay. The wind whistled through the broken structures, carrying with it the smell of dust and old metal. But it was theirs. She climbed out of the truck, her boots crunching on the gravel. Emma followed, staying close to her side. Together, they walked toward the tower, stepping carefully over debris and twisted metal. Birds scattered from the rafters of the hangar, their wings flashing in the sunlight. The door to the control tower hung open, its hinges rusted through. Sarah peered inside. A narrow staircase spiraled upward into darkness, the steps covered in dust and bird droppings. The walls were tagged with graffiti, crude drawings, and initials left by trespassers over the years. "Can we go up?" Emma asked. Sarah hesitated. Every instinct told her it wasn't safe. The structure looked like it might collapse at any moment, but curiosity burned in her chest, a need to see what was at the top, to understand what she had bought. "Stay close to me," she said. They climbed slowly, testing each step before putting their weight on it. The stairs groaned and creaked, but held. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the walls, casting strange patterns on the floor. The air smelled of mildew and decay. At the top, they emerged into the control room. It was a circular space, its windows offering a panoramic view of the desert and the broken runway below. Old equipment lined the walls, radios and control panels covered in dust, their screens cracked and dark. Papers lay scattered across the floor, their ink faded to illegibility. Emma walked to the window and looked out. "It's so big," she said softly. Sarah stood beside her, taking in the view. From up here, the airport looked even more desolate, a vast graveyard of concrete and rust. But beneath the decay, she could see the bones of what it had once been. The long runway, straight and purposeful. The hangar, large enough to hold multiple aircraft. The tower itself, tall and commanding. This place had been alive once. People had worked here. Planes had landed and taken off. Dreams had been born and died within these walls. And now it was hers, a broken inheritance from a world that had moved on. As she turned to leave, her foot caught on something. She looked down and saw a metal panel in the floor, partially hidden beneath years of accumulated dust and debris. It was about 2 feet square, with a small recessed handle. "What's that?" Emma asked. Sarah knelt down and brushed away the dust. The panel was secured with a heavy padlock, rusted but still intact. She pulled at it, but it held firm. A hidden panel, locked, in the floor of an abandoned control tower. Her heart began to race. "Come on," she said to Emma, her voice tight. "We need to go." They climbed back down the stairs and returned to the truck. Sarah sat behind the wheel, her mind spinning. A locked panel, hidden in the floor. What could possibly be under there? She thought of the stories she'd heard, of old airports used for smuggling, of hidden caches left behind by pilots, of secrets buried in forgotten places. It was probably nothing, probably just old equipment or files. But what if it wasn't? That night, back at the trailer, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the locked panel. The next morning, before Emma woke up, she drove to a hardware store and bought a bolt cutter. It cost $30, money she couldn't afford to spend, but she had to know. She returned to the airport alone, leaving Emma with Rachel. The desert was quiet in the early morning light, the air still cool. Sarah climbed the tower stairs again, her heart pounding, and knelt beside the metal panel. The bolt cutter made quick work of the rusted padlock. It snapped with a sharp crack that echoed in the empty room. Sarah took a breath, gripped the handle, and pulled. The panel lifted with a groan, revealing a dark space below. She shone her phone's flashlight into the opening and saw a metal ladder descending into what looked like a small vault. Her hands trembled as she climbed down. The vault was cramped, about 6 feet square, with concrete walls and a single metal shelf. And on that shelf sat a row of metal cases, sealed and dusty. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She pulled the first case down and set it on the floor. The latches were stiff, but they opened. Inside, wrapped in yellowed paper, were stacks of bills. Old bills, hundreds, thousands, more than she could count. She opened the second case. More money. The third. Bonds. Official-looking documents. Certificates. Her vision blurred. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the flashlight. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. She climbed back up the ladder, leaving the cases below, and sat on the floor of the control room with her head in her hands. Her mind raced. The money, the bonds, where had it come from? How long had it been here? And what was she supposed to do now? She thought of Emma, of the eviction notice, of the medical bills, of the endless, crushing weight of poverty that had defined their lives for so long, and she realized that everything had just changed. But before she could celebrate, before she could even begin to process what she had found, she heard the sound of tires on gravel below, a vehicle pulling up, doors slamming, voices. Sarah's heart stopped. She crawled to the window and peered down. 3 men stood beside a black SUV, looking up at the tower. They wore suits, incongruous in the desert setting. One of them pointed toward the entrance. They were coming inside. Sarah's mind went blank with panic. The cases, the vault. She had to close it, had to hide what she had found. She moved quickly, climbing back down into the vault, shoving the cases back onto the shelf, pulling the metal panel closed above her. The footsteps echoed up the stairs. Voices, low and urgent. She crouched in the darkness of the vault, her heart hammering, and listened as the men entered the control room above. Sarah pressed herself against the cold concrete wall of the vault, her breath coming in short, silent gasps. Above her, footsteps echoed across the control room floor. Heavy boots, deliberate movements. The voices were clearer now, and they carried an edge that made her blood run cold. "It should be here," one of them said. "The old man's notes," said the tower. "Top floor. Hidden compartment." "Are you sure?" Another voice replied, younger, uncertain. "This place has been abandoned for decades. Someone could have found it already." "No one's found it," the first voice said flatly. We've been monitoring the property records. No one's even looked at this place until some idiot bought it at auction last week. Sarah's heart lurched. They were talking about her. You think they know? The younger voice asked. Doesn't matter. We'll handle it. There was the sound of things being moved, papers rustling, equipment dragged across the floor, then the scrape of metal on concrete. They had found the panel. Here, the first man said. The lock's been cut. Fresh. Someone's been here. Silence. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She was trapped. If they opened the panel, they would find her. And, if they found her, she didn't know what they would do. Check it, the first man ordered. Footsteps approached. The panel groaned as someone tried to lift it. Sarah held her breath, her eyes squeezed shut. Then, mercifully, a phone rang. The sound was sharp and jarring in the stillness. Yeah? The first man answered. A pause. Now? We're in the middle of something. Another pause. His tone changed, became deferential. Understood. We'll head back. The footsteps retreated. Voices moved toward the stairs. We'll come back, tonight, the first man said. With proper tools. If someone's been down there, we need to move fast before they figure out what they have. What about the owner? We'll take care of it. The words hung in the air like a threat. Then the men were gone, their footsteps receding down the stairs, the sound of their vehicle starting and driving away. Sarah waited in the darkness for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When she was certain they were gone, she pushed the panel open and climbed out. Her legs shaking so badly she could barely stand. She had to get out of here, had to think, had to figure out what was happening. She ran down the stairs, stumbled to her truck, and drove away from the airport as fast as the old vehicle would go. Her mind raced. The men knew about the vault. They had been looking for it. And they knew she had found it. Who were they? How did they know? And what exactly had she discovered? Back at the trailer, she paced the small living room while Emma watched cartoons, oblivious to her mother's panic. Sarah pulled out her phone and started searching. Roosevelt Field Airport history, abandoned Arizona airports, hidden money. What she found made her stomach drop. Roosevelt Field had been a small municipal airport built in the 1952, used primarily for private planes and cargo flights. But in the 1982, it had become entangled in a federal investigation. Allegations of smuggling, drug running, money laundering. The airport had been shut down abruptly in 1987, its operators arrested, its assets seized. But not all the assets had been recovered. Sarah read article after article, her hands trembling. The case had been notorious at the time, involving millions of dollars that had simply vanished. The lead operator, a man named Vincent Caruso, had died in prison in 1995, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. The money had never been found. Until now. Sarah sat back, her mind reeling. The vault in the control tower, the cases of money and bonds. It had to be Caruso's stash, hidden decades ago and forgotten. And somehow, the men in the suits knew about it. They had been looking for it. They wanted it back, and they knew she had been there. Her phone rang, shattering her thoughts. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Miss Mitchell, a smooth, professional voice said. My name is Richard Hale. I represent a private investment firm interested in purchasing the property you recently acquired, Roosevelt Field Airport. We'd like to make you an offer. Sarah's mouth went dry. How did you get this number? Property records are public, Miss Mitchell. We've been monitoring that land for some time. We're prepared to offer you $50,000 for an immediate sale. Cash. Today. $50,000. It was more money than she had seen in years. Enough to pay off her debts, keep the trailer, give Emma the medical care she needed. But something in the man's voice made her hesitate. The timing was too convenient, the offer too quick. "Why?" she asked. "The property's worthless. We specialize in redevelopment," Hale said smoothly. "Abandoned land. It's what we do. The offer is generous, Miss Mitchell. I suggest you take it." "I need to think about it." "There's nothing to think about," Hale said, and now there was an edge to his voice. $50,000. Today, or you walk away with nothing." "I said I need to think about it," Sarah repeated, and hung up. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. They wanted the land. They wanted it badly enough to make an offer within days of her purchase, which meant what was in that vault was worth far more than $50,000. She thought of the men in the tower. "We'll take care of it," one of them had said. Take care of what? The vault? Or her? She needed help. She needed someone who could tell her what she had found, what it was worth, and what to do about it. But who could she trust? That evening, after putting Emma to bed, Sarah made a decision. She would go back to the airport. Tonight. She would document everything in the vault, take photographs, and then she would reach out to a lawyer. Maybe the authorities. Someone who could protect her and Emma from whoever these men were. She waited until midnight, then slipped out of the trailer and drove back into the desert. The airport looked even more desolate in the darkness. The control tower, a black silhouette against the star-filled sky. She parked at a distance and approached on foot, her phone's flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the darkness. The tower was silent. No signs of the men returning. She climbed the stairs quickly, her heart pounding, and opened the panel. The vault waited below, undisturbed. She climbed down and began photographing everything. The cases, the money, the bonds, each document. She worked methodically, her hands steadier now, focused on the task. Then she found something she had missed before, a leather folder, tucked behind the cases. Inside were more documents, ledgers, names, dates, bank account numbers, and a handwritten note on yellowed paper. To whoever finds this, it read, "This is the evidence they tried to bury." Vincent Caruso did not work alone. The names in these ledgers are the real criminals, the ones who walked free while I rotted in prison. If you're reading this, you have a choice. Take the money and run, or use the truth. 2. Bring them down. Choose wisely. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the words again. This wasn't just money. It was evidence. Evidence of crimes committed decades ago by people who were still out there. People powerful enough to shut down an airport, to make millions disappear, to ruin lives. People who would do anything to keep this buried. She heard it then. The sound of an engine, headlights, sweeping across the desert. They were coming back. Sarah shoved the folder into her jacket, climbed out of the vault, and pulled the panel closed. She ran down the stairs, her feet pounding on the metal steps. The headlights were closer now, multiple vehicles converging on the tower. She burst out of the entrance and sprinted toward her truck. Behind her, she heard shouting, the slam of car doors, footsteps running after her. She reached the truck, threw herself inside, and started the engine. The tires spun in the gravel as she floored the accelerator, the old vehicle lurching forward. In the rearview mirror, she saw the men running after her, but they were too late. She was already speeding away into the darkness. Her heart raced. Her hands gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had the evidence. She had the proof. But now, they knew she had taken it, and they would come for her. As she drove back toward Phoenix, the lights of the city glowing on the horizon, Sarah realized that her life had just become far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. She had bought an abandoned airport for $500, hoping for a miracle. Instead, she had found a secret that people had killed for, and now she was running for her life. But she also knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let them take it from her. Not the money. Not the truth. Not her daughter's future. Whatever it took, she would fight. The drive back to Phoenix felt like it took forever. Sarah's eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror, watching for headlights that might be following her. The leather folder sat on the passenger seat like a bomb, its contents heavy with implications she was only beginning to understand. By the time she reached the trailer park, dawn was breaking over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She sat in the truck for a long moment, trying to steady her breathing, trying to think clearly through the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't go to the police. Not yet. The ledger had mentioned names, powerful people. She didn't know who might be compromised, who might be connected to the men in the suits. She needed someone she could trust, absolutely. Someone outside the system. Rachel, her sister, would know what to do, or at least, she would help Sarah figure it out. She waited until Emma woke up, fed her breakfast while trying to act normal, then called Rachel and asked if she could watch Emma for the day. "I have some things to take care of," Sarah said, keeping her voice light, despite the exhaustion that made her feel like she was moving through water. At Rachel's house, she finally broke down. They sat in the kitchen while Emma played in the backyard, and Sarah told her sister everything. The vault, the money, the men, the folder. Rachel's face went pale. "Sarah," she whispered, "this is insane. This is dangerous. You need to go to the FBI." "I will," Sarah said. "But first, I need to know exactly what I have. I need to understand the value, the implications, and I need to make copies of everything, secure them somewhere safe." "Do you even hear yourself?" Rachel asked. "These people threatened you. They're looking for you. Every minute you wait puts you and Emma at risk." "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but if I go to the authorities now, with just these documents, they'll take everything. The money, the evidence, all of it. And Emma and I will be left with nothing again. Except now, we'll have made enemies of people who are willing to kill." She pulled the folder onto the table and opened it. "Look at these names, Rachel. CEOs, politicians, federal agents. This goes deep. If I'm going to do this, I need leverage. I need insurance. And I need to know exactly what I'm walking into." Rachel stared at the documents, her face a mixture of fear and disbelief. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said. "Okay. But we do this smart. We document everything, make multiple copies, and then we contact the FBI through a lawyer. Someone who specializes in whistleblower cases." "Agreed?" "Agreed," Sarah said. They spent the rest of the day at a copy center, duplicating every page of the ledger, every document, every photograph Sarah had taken. They created 3 sets of copies, storing them in different locations. One in a safe deposit box Rachel opened at a bank, one with a lawyer Rachel knew from her work, and one uploaded to an encrypted cloud storage service. By evening, Sarah felt slightly less terrified. She had backups. She had a plan. Now she just needed to figure out the next step. That night, back at the trailer, her phone rang. The same unknown number as before. She answered. "Miss Mitchell." Richard Hale's voice was colder now, stripped of its earlier politeness. "I think we need to have a conversation. Face to face." "I have nothing to say to you," Sarah replied. "Oh, I think you do. You see, you've taken something that doesn't belong to you, something that certain people want returned. Now, you seem like a smart woman, a mother. I imagine you want to do what's best for your daughter." The threat was barely veiled. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "Is that a threat?" "It's a reality check," Hale said. "You're in over your head. There are people involved in this who don't negotiate. They eliminate problems. Right now, you're a problem. But it doesn't have to be that way. Return what you took, walk away, and we'll make sure you and your daughter are taken care of. Financially. Permanently. How much? Sarah asked, buying time. $200,000, Hale said. Cash. Clean. Untraceable. Enough to start over somewhere nice. Somewhere safe. 200,000. It was a fortune. Enough to change their lives. But Sarah thought of the ledger, of the names, of the millions that must be at stake if they were willing to pay that much to make her disappear. I need time to think, she said. You have 24 hours, Hale replied. After that, the offer expires, along with our patience. He hung up. Sarah sat in the darkness of the trailer, her mind racing. $200,000 for documents that implicated some of the most powerful people in the state, maybe the country, which meant the vault's contents were worth far more. She thought of the money and bonds still sitting in the vault. She had documented them, but she hadn't taken them, hadn't counted them. She had been too panicked, too focused on escape, but now she needed to know exactly what she was dealing with. The next morning, leaving Emma with Rachel again, Sarah drove back to the airport. This time, she brought tools, better lights, a camera, and a lockbox. She approached cautiously, watching for any signs of surveillance. The tower appeared empty, untouched. She climbed to the vault and began a methodical inventory. The first case contained cash, bundled in stacks of hundreds, old bills, from the 1,980 seconds. She counted $850,000. The second case, more cash, $920,000. The third, bonds, U.S. Treasury bonds, matured, worth approximately $4.2 million at current value. The fourth case changed everything. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, were small leather pouches. Sarah opened one and gasped. Diamonds. Uncut stones that glittered in the light of her flashlight. Dozens of them. She opened the second pouch. More diamonds. The third. Gold coins. Krugerrands. American eagles. More than she could count. She sat back, her hands shaking. This wasn't just hidden money from a smuggling operation. This was a fortune. A massive, unbelievable fortune that someone had stashed away and forgotten. Or, maybe not forgotten. Maybe someone had always known it was here, had always been waiting for the right moment to retrieve it. She photographed everything, documented each item, made notes. When she finally climbed out of the vault, she estimated the total value, somewhere between $10 and $15 million, possibly more depending on the diamond's quality. Her head spun. This was real. This was actually real. She owned an airport that contained a hidden fortune worth millions, and people were trying to take it from her. She drove back to Rachel's house and showed her sister the photographs, the documentation. Rachel's face went white. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Sarah, this is insane. You have to go to the FBI. Now. Today." "I know," Sarah said. "But first, I need to understand my legal position. The property is mine. I bought it legally. Does that mean the contents are mine too? Or does the government have a claim because it's from a criminal enterprise?" "You need a lawyer," Rachel said firmly. "A really good lawyer. Someone who specializes in asset forfeiture, criminal proceeds, all of it." That afternoon, they met with David Brennan, an attorney Rachel's boss had recommended. He specialized in white-collar crime and whistleblower cases. Sarah told him everything, showed him the documents, the photographs. Brennan listened carefully, taking notes. When she finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "This is extraordinary," he said, "and complicated. The money and assets are technically on property you own, which gives you a strong initial claim, but they're proceeds from criminal activity, which the government can seize under federal asset forfeiture laws. So, I get nothing? Sarah asked, her heart sinking. Not necessarily, Brennan said. The Whistleblower Act provides protections and rewards for people who provide evidence of major financial crimes. If we handle this correctly, you could receive a substantial percentage of the recovered assets as a reward. Potentially 15 to 30%. Sarah did the math. 15% of $10 million was $1.5 million. 30% was $3 million. But, Brennan continued, there's significant risk. The people named in these documents won't want this exposed. They'll fight hard to discredit you, to make the evidence disappear. You need to understand what you're walking into. What do you recommend? Sarah asked. We contact the FBI, Brennan said. But we do it on our terms. We arrange a meeting at a federal building, in a secure location. We bring copies of the evidence, but not the originals. We negotiate your protection and your compensation before we hand anything over. And we make sure everything is documented, recorded, witnessed. Sarah looked at Rachel, then back at Brennan. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Over the next 3 days, Brennan worked behind the scenes, making calls, arranging meetings. Finally, he scheduled a sit-down with 2 FBI agents and an assistant U.S. attorney at the federal courthouse in Phoenix. The night before the meeting, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, thinking about what tomorrow might bring. Would they believe her? Would they protect her? Or would she be walking into a trap? At 9 a.m., she and Brennan entered a secure conference room in the courthouse. 2 FBI agents sat across from them, Agent Maria Rodriguez and Agent Tom Fisher. Beside them was Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Park. Brennan laid out the situation carefully, providing copies of the ledger, the photographs, the documentation. The agents examined everything in silence. Sarah watched their faces, trying to read their reactions. Finally, Rodriguez looked up. This is legitimate, she said quietly. These names, these accounts, we've been investigating some of these individuals for years, but we've never had solid evidence. This could break the case wide open. What about my client's safety? Brennan asked. And her compensation? Park spoke for the first time. Miss Mitchell will be entered into witness protection if necessary. We'll also file for a whistleblower reward. Given the magnitude of what's here, I'd estimate 20 to 25% of recovered assets. That's acceptable, Brennan said. But we need guarantees in writing before we provide the original documents. The negotiations took hours. Finally, they reached an agreement. Sarah would turn over all the evidence and cooperate fully with the investigation. In exchange, she would receive 25% of any assets recovered, with a minimum guarantee of $2 million, even if the full recovery took years. She and Emma would be placed in protective custody until the arrests were made. When Sarah signed the agreement, her hand trembled. This was it. The moment everything changed, for better or worse. She had just stepped into a world she barely understood. That evening, a team of federal agents accompanied Sarah and Emma to the airport. They excavated the vault completely, documenting and removing every item under Sarah's supervision. The money, the bonds, the diamonds, the gold, all of it was catalogued, photographed, and transported to a secure federal facility. Sarah watched them work, feeling a strange mixture of relief and loss. The fortune was no longer hers to hide, but she had done the right thing. She had chosen truth over easy money. The investigation moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, the FBI had made its first arrests. A former state senator, a retired DEA agent, a real estate developer, all named in the ledger, all connected to the Roosevelt Field operation from decades ago. The news broke like a thunderclap. The media descended on the story. Hidden fortune discovered in abandoned airport. Single mother exposes decades-old conspiracy. Phoenix Airport yields millions in criminal proceeds. Sarah and Emma were moved to a safe house, their identities protected. But the story was too big to contain. Within days, Sarah found herself at the center of a national news story. Rachel visited her at the safe house, bringing clothes and Emma's favorite toys. They sat together in the small, secure apartment, while Emma played in the next room. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked softly. Sarah thought about the question. Was she okay? She had been threatened, chased, terrified. She had uncovered a conspiracy, exposed criminals, put herself and her daughter at risk. But she had also done something impossible. She had turned $500 into millions. She had stood up to people who thought they were untouchable. She had changed her life and Emma's forever. "I'm okay," she said finally. "I'm actually okay." 3 months later, the first phase of the investigation concluded. 27 people had been arrested. Over $200 million in assets had been seized, including property, bank accounts, and investments that had been hidden for decades. The case made headlines around the world. Sarah received her first payment, $2 million, as guaranteed. The rest would come later, as the government liquidated the seized assets. Her lawyer estimated her total compensation would eventually reach $8 to $10 million. She and Emma moved out of the safe house and into a small, comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. Sarah paid off every debt, every medical bill. She put money aside for Emma's education, for their future. And she kept the deed to Roosevelt Field Airport, though she had no intention of ever returning there. 6 months after finding the vault, Sarah stood in the kitchen of her new home, watching Emma play in the backyard. The little girl's cough had finally cleared, thanks to proper medical care. Her daughter laughed, ran, played like a normal child, like a child who didn't have to worry about eviction notices or bills or fear. Sarah's phone rang. It was Agent Rodriguez. "Miss Mitchell," the agent said, "I wanted to let you know. We arrested Richard Hale this morning. He's been charged with conspiracy, intimidation of a witness, and attempted extortion. He won't be bothering you anymore." "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. "No," Rodriguez replied. "Thank you. What you did took courage. You could have taken the money and run. Instead, you did the right thing. Not many people would have made that choice." After the call ended, Sarah walked outside and sat on the back porch, watching her daughter play. The Arizona sun was warm on her face. For the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed: peace. She thought back to that day at the library, when she had found the listing for the abandoned airport, when she had made the crazy, desperate decision to spend her last $500 on a piece of broken land in the desert. Everyone had laughed at her. Her family, her sister, even she had doubted herself. But she had been right to take the risk. Not because of the money, though that had changed everything, but because she had refused to give up. She had chosen to fight, even when fighting seemed impossible. The media continued to call it luck. Lucky find, chance, discovery. But Sarah knew better. It wasn't luck. It was desperation turned into determination. It was a mother refusing to let her daughter down. It was the courage to open a door when everyone else said to walk away. That evening, as the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Sarah tucked Emma into bed. Her daughter looked up at her with sleepy eyes. "Mom," Emma said, "are we going to be okay now?" Sarah smiled and brushed the hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, baby. We're going to be okay. We're going to be more than okay." Emma smiled and closed her eyes. Within moments, she was asleep. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching her daughter breathe, feeling the weight of the past year finally lift from her shoulders. She had bought an abandoned airport for $500, hoping for nothing more than a place to survive. Instead, she had found something far more valuable than gold or diamonds, or hidden fortunes. She had found proof that miracles still existed, that desperate chances sometimes paid off, that the world could still surprise you, even when you thought you had nothing left to lose. And as she turned off the light and walked down the hallway of her new home, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage that had led her to climb those stairs in the control tower, the same determination that had helped her survive. Because she was no longer the woman who had opened that eviction notice with trembling hands. She was the woman who had stood up to criminals, who had fought for her daughter, who had turned $500 into a new life. She was Sarah Mitchell, and she was just getting started. 2 years after the discovery, Sarah Mitchell stood in a place she never imagined she would return to. The desert stretched before her, vast and unforgiving under the midday sun. But now, it looked different. Where there had once been only decay and abandonment, there was transformation. The old control tower had been restored, its windows replaced, its metal frame reinforced and painted. The cracked runway had been repaired in sections, not for aircraft, but for something else entirely. And the hangar, once collapsed and rusting, now stood proud with new walls, and a sign that made Sarah's chest tighten with emotion every time she saw it. The Roosevelt Field Community Center and Museum. It had been Emma's idea, actually. 6 months after the investigation concluded, when the money had been secured and their lives had finally stabilized, Emma had asked a simple question at the dinner table. "Mom, what are you going to do with the airport?" Sarah had shrugged. "I don't know, honey. Probably sell it eventually. Nobody needs an abandoned airport." But Emma had looked at her with those serious eyes, so much older than her 9 years, and said, "But it saved us. Shouldn't we save it back?" The words had struck something deep inside Sarah. That night, unable to sleep, she had driven out to Roosevelt Field alone, parking in the same spot where she had first arrived 2 years earlier. She had walked through the property, now familiar rather than frightening, and let herself remember. She remembered the desperation that had brought her here, the eviction notice, the medical bills, the grinding poverty that had made every day feel like drowning. She remembered climbing those stairs for the first time, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. And she remembered the moment she had opened that vault, when everything had changed. The airport hadn't just given her money, it had given her courage. It had proven that taking risks, even desperate ones, could lead to something extraordinary. And now it sat here, still abandoned, still forgotten, serving no purpose except as a monument to her own private miracle. Emma was right. It deserved better. The idea had grown slowly, taking shape over months of research and planning. Sarah had reached out to community organizations, to veterans groups, to historians who specialized in Arizona aviation. She had learned that Roosevelt Field had once been more than just a hub for criminal activity. In its early years, it had trained pilots, served as an emergency landing strip, hosted air shows that brought the whole county together. It had meant something to people, and it could mean something again. Sarah had hired architects and contractors, investing a portion of her reward money into a vision that had started as a whisper and grown into something solid. The control tower would become a museum, documenting not just the building's history, but the broader story of small regional airports across America. The hangar would be converted into a community center, offering programs for at-risk youth, veterans, and families in need. And the runway, restored in patches, would host community events, farmers, markets, outdoor movie nights under the desert stars. The project had taken 18 months. There had been setbacks, permit delays, construction problems. Sarah had learned more about building codes and historic preservation than she ever wanted to know. But she had persisted, driven by the same stubbornness that had made her bid on the property in the first place. Now, on opening day, hundreds of people gathered on the restored grounds, Local officials gave speeches. Veterans saluted the flag raised on the new pole beside the tower. Children ran across the concrete, their laughter echoing where once there had been only silence. Sarah stood near the entrance to the museum, greeting visitors as they arrived. Many were strangers, curious locals, who had read about the project in the newspaper. But some were familiar faces, people whose lives had intersected with hers over the past 2 years. Agent Rodriguez arrived with her family, shaking Sarah's hand warmly. "You did something remarkable here," the agent said, looking around at the transformed property. "Most people would have taken the money and disappeared. You gave back." "I'm just paying forward what this place gave me," Sarah replied. Rachel appeared next, her arms full of flowers for the planters Sarah had installed near the entrance. Her sister had been skeptical at first, worried that Sarah was throwing money away on a dream. But she had come around, eventually volunteering to help with fundraising and community outreach. "Emma's inside with the first tour group," Rachel said, setting down the flowers. "She's telling everyone about the control tower. Very dramatic. I think you're raising a future historian." Sarah laughed, feeling warmth spread through her chest. Emma had indeed become fascinated with the building's history, spending hours reading old records and interviewing people who remembered Roosevelt Field in its prime. The girl who had once been too sick to play now ran through the museum, with boundless energy, sharing stories with anyone who would listen. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself climbing the stairs of the control tower, slipping away from the crowd for a moment of solitude. The stairs no longer creaked with danger. They were solid now, safe, lined with photographs and informational plaques that told the story of the airport's rise and fall. At the top, the control room had been transformed into an exhibition space. The old equipment had been preserved where possible, cleaned and displayed behind protective barriers. The windows, now intact, offered the same panoramic view of the desert, but the perspective felt different. Where she had once seen only desolation, she now saw possibility. She walked to the spot where the vault panel had been. It was sealed now, marked with a simple brass plaque that read, "In this space, history was preserved and justice was served. May we always have the courage to uncover truth." Sarah ran her fingers over the words, remembering the terror of that first discovery, the panic of being chased, the weight of the decision to do the right thing rather than the easy thing. She had been so afraid, so certain she would fail. But she hadn't failed. She had survived. More than that, she had prevailed. "Mom?" Sarah turned to find Emma standing at the top of the stairs, slightly out of breath from the climb. Her daughter had grown so much in 2 years. Taller, healthier, more confident. The sickly child who had coughed through sleepless nights was gone, replaced by a vibrant girl with her whole life ahead of her. "Hey, sweetheart," Sarah said, opening her arms. Emma came to her, and they stood together at the window, looking out over the desert. "It's really cool what you did here," Emma said softly. "Everyone's talking about it. They're saying you're inspiring." Sarah smiled. "I'm not inspiring. I'm just someone who got lucky." "No," Emma said firmly, with that serious tone that always surprised Sarah. "Lucky is finding money. What you did was brave. You didn't have to turn it in. You didn't have to fight those bad people. You didn't have to build all this. You chose to." Sarah pulled her daughter closer, feeling tears prick at her eyes. "You know why I did it." "Why?" "Because of you. Everything I did was because I wanted to show you that we don't have to accept the world the way it is. We can change it. Even when we're scared. Even when everyone says we can't." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "Did it work? Am I learning?" Sarah laughed through her tears. "Yeah, baby. I think you're learning just fine." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the celebration below. Sarah could see the vendors setting up for the evening market, the band tuning their instruments for the concert that would cap off the day's festivities. She could see neighbors talking, children playing, people coming together in a space that had been dead for decades. This was what the money had really bought. Not just security for her and Emma, but hope for an entire community. A place where people could gather, learn, connect. A second chance, not just for her, but for everyone who walked through those gates. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah made her way back downstairs. The museum would close soon, but the outdoor celebration would continue into the evening. There would be food trucks, live music, a movie projected on the side of the hangar as darkness fell. Near the entrance, she found a small group of reporters waiting. Over the past 2 years, Sarah had given countless interviews, her story repeated in newspapers and magazines across the country. At first, the attention had been overwhelming, even frightening. But she had learned to use it, to leverage the publicity to raise funds for the community center, to advocate for other struggling families. "Miss Mitchell," one reporter called out, "can you tell, to us, what this day means to you?" Sarah paused, considering the question. What did it mean? It meant the end of a journey that had begun with an eviction notice and $500. It meant transformation, redemption, hope. It meant that sometimes the most desperate gambles paid off in ways you could never imagine. "It means," she said slowly, "that broken things can be fixed, places can be reborn, and that everyone deserves a second chance, whether they're a person or a building." Another reporter spoke up. "Any advice for others facing difficult times?" Sarah thought of that morning at the library, scrolling through listings with her last dollars in her pocket. She thought of the fear that had nearly stopped her from bidding, the mockery of her family, the certainty that she was making a mistake. "Take the risk," she said, "even when you're terrified, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. Sometimes the only way forward is through the door everyone else is too afraid to open." As the reporters scribbled notes and camera clicked, Sarah caught sight of a familiar figure in the crowd, an elderly man, thin and weathered, with sharp eyes that held recognition. He approached slowly, leaning on a cane. "Miss Mitchell?" he said, his voice rough with age. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Robert Caruso. Vincent Caruso was my brother." Sarah's breath caught. Vincent Caruso, the man who had hidden the fortune, who had gone to prison, who had died there, still protecting his secrets. She had learned his story through the investigation, but she had never met any of his family. "I wanted to thank you," Robert continued, his eyes glistening. "What you found, those documents, they proved what my brother tried to tell everyone for years. He wasn't the mastermind. He was the fall guy, protecting people who should have been in prison instead of him. Because of you, the truth finally came out. His name is finally cleared." Sarah felt emotion well up in her throat. She had thought of her discovery only in terms of what it meant for her and Emma, for the investigation, for the money. She hadn't considered that it might bring peace to a family that had lived with shame for decades. "Thank you for telling me that," she said softly. "Your brother, in a strange way, he saved us. If he hadn't hidden that evidence, if he hadn't left that note, none of this would have happened." Robert smiled, tears running down his weathered cheeks. He would have liked that. Vincent always said the truth would come out eventually. He just didn't know it would take 30 years and a desperate mother to make it happen. They talked for a while longer, Robert sharing memories of his brother before the fall, before the arrests and the shame. Sarah listened, understanding that her story was connected to so many others, threads of fate weaving together across decades. As evening fell and the celebration shifted into its nighttime phase, Sarah found a quiet spot near the edge of the property. String lights had been hung across the open space, creating a canopy of soft illumination. Music drifted through the air, a local band playing covers of old country songs. Emma ran past with a group of new friends, her face flushed with happiness. Sarah watched her go, marveling at the change in both of them. 2 years ago, they had been on the edge of disaster. Now they were here, surrounded by community, by hope, by proof that life could change in an instant. Her phone buzzed. A text from David Brennan, her lawyer, who had become a friend through the long process of the investigation and its aftermath, saw the news coverage. "Congratulations on the opening. You did something incredible, Sarah. Not just finding the money, but what you built with it. That's the real treasure." Sarah smiled and typed back a reply. "Thank you for everything. None of this would have been possible without you." As she slipped the phone back into her pocket, she felt someone approach. A young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with nervous eyes and worn clothes that Sarah recognized all too well. The uniform of poverty, of struggle. "Excuse me," the woman said hesitantly. "Are you Sarah Mitchell?" "I am," Sarah replied gently. "I read about you, about what you did. And I wanted to tell you that your story gave me hope. I'm in a bad situation right now. Really bad. And everyone keeps telling me to just accept it, to stop fighting, to give up. But your story made me think that maybe I shouldn't. Maybe there's a way through." Sarah felt her heart clench. She saw herself in this woman's eyes, the desperation, the fear, the thin thread of hope that was all that kept you standing. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Jessica. Jessica, I want you to know something. The day I bought this place, I had $523 to my name. I was about to be evicted. My daughter was sick. I was so scared I could barely breathe. And everyone, told me I was making the worst decision of my life." "Were they wrong?" Jessica asked. "They were wrong about this specific thing," Sarah said carefully. "But they weren't wrong to be worried. It was a crazy risk. It could have gone terribly wrong. I could have lost everything. The only reason it worked out is because I got incredibly, impossibly lucky. Most abandoned properties don't have hidden fortunes in them." She paused, making sure Jessica was really hearing her. "But here's what I learned. The risk itself, the act of trying, of refusing to give up, that's what saved me. Not the money, the choice to keep fighting even when it seemed hopeless. That's what you take with you, no matter how things turn out." Jessica nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. "This is the community center's number. We have resources, connections to services, people who can help. Call on Monday. Ask for Rachel, she's my sister. Tell her I sent you. We'll figure something out together." As Jessica walked away, clutching the card like a lifeline, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility and privilege. She had been given an extraordinary gift, not just money, but a platform, a voice, the ability to help others who were where she had been. She couldn't save everyone. She couldn't find hidden fortunes for every struggling family. But she could do this, create spaces and systems that gave people a fighting chance. The celebration continued long into the night. Sarah danced with Emma under the string lights, ate street tacos from one of the vendors, listened to the band play while sitting on the hood of her car, the same car she had driven here in terror 2 years ago. As midnight approached and the crowd began to thin, Sarah climbed the control tower one last time. She stood in the museum, now quiet and still, and looked at the exhibits she had helped create. Photographs of the airport in its prime, stories of the pilots who had trained here, a section dedicated to the investigation, handled carefully and respectfully, focusing on justice served rather than scandal. And there, in a glass case near the window, was a small display that meant more to her than any of the others. The eviction notice, framed and preserved. Next to it, the original property listing she had found at the library, and beside that, a photograph of her and Emma on the day they first visited the airport, taken by Rachel from her phone, their faces uncertain and afraid. The plaque beneath read, "Every ending is a beginning. Every desperate chance is an act of courage." This is where Sarah and Emma Mitchell's new life began. She traced her fingers over the glass, remembering that terrified woman who had spent her last money on a broken dream. She wanted to tell that woman that everything would be okay, that the fear would pass, that the struggle would end, that she was stronger than she knew. But she didn't need to. That woman had figured it out herself. As Sarah locked the museum and walked back to her car, Emma already asleep in the passenger seat, she took one last look at Roosevelt Field. The lights were still strung across the property, glowing softly in the darkness. The American flag rippled in the night breeze, and the control tower stood tall, no longer a symbol of abandonment, but of renewal. She had bought this place for $500, hoping for nothing more than survival. Instead, she had found purpose. She had uncovered truth. She had built community. She had proven that broken things could be made whole again. As she drove away, the airport disappearing in her rearview mirror, Sarah thought about the future. There would be challenges ahead, always. The community center would need funding, programming, constant attention. Her own money, though substantial, wouldn't last forever. Life would continue to be complicated, but she was ready. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. She had learned that sometimes the most foolish-seeming choices were actually the bravest. She had learned that giving back was just as important as getting ahead. Most importantly, she had learned that she was capable of extraordinary things, and so was her daughter. And so was anyone who refused to accept that broken had to mean finished. The desert stretched before them, dark and vast under the stars. But Sarah wasn't afraid of the darkness anymore. She had learned that, hidden in the shadows, were possibilities beyond imagination. You just had to be brave enough to look. And she had been. She was. She would be. As Emma stirred in her sleep, Sarah reached over and gently squeezed her daughter's hand. "We did good, baby," she whispered. "We did real good." The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Sarah Mitchell drove forward without fear, her eyes on the horizon, her heart full of hope, because she had learned the greatest lesson of all, that $500 and courage could change the world. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.